Hi there, this is Raine from RAINEDROPS.com. How would you like a spiritual reading? How would you like an Akashic record reading? What about Akashic healing? Past life regressions? This and more you'll find on raindrops.com that you can see below. Don't forget the E. It says my name, Raine. So I'm doing a short series, reading one chapter from each of my 4 books. And I've chosen this particular chapter because in today's world, it really affects all of us. It's something that's close to all of our hearts. And I hope it will bring you comfort, some knowledge, peace. And if you need help, there are helplines available to help you. You are not alone. This is the book called Raindrops from Heaven, and you can see the angels are sending information down to the raindrops figure. And it's chapter 1 called We Make Our Own Choices. Cooking is not one of my favorite pastimes. And truth to tell, I'm not a very good cook. Any excuse to get out of cooking and I will jump to it. But it was with particular regret this evening that with dinner almost cooked, I turned the dinner off and watched with deep sadness the trauma unfolding in my neighborhood. There's been a death, I said to my daughter. Oh, how do you know? She said. Oh, I just know there is, I said, trying to avoid telling her that the young man who had tragically passed away was sitting in the corner of our lounge, watching his folks through my window. I just knew he had taken his own life, and now he was frightened. He was tormented watching his parents go through the horror of finding his body and how distraught they were. This young man had sat in the car whilst the fumes from the pipe feeding carbon monoxide into the car had asphyxiated him, taking his life. He thought his dad would arrive home first and find him. He hadn't counted on his mother changing her plan and arriving home early, only to find her son slumped in his car, obviously unconscious, if not already dead. His mother ran outside screaming and screaming for help, but nobody seemed to hear her pleas, and she was left to deal with the shocking trauma all by herself. She telephoned for help, and the ambulance and police arrived at her home before her husband got there. Sadly, the young man had passed away and was not able to be resuscitated. His mother could not believe the nightmare she was living, and part of her felt she must be going to wake up and find that all of this was just a bad dream. However, this was not the case. This was real life, and this was her son who had taken his own life. These things happen, and you read it in the newspaper, but it never visits our doorstep. Isn't that what we all believe? There were two sons in this family, quite close in age, both at university, and so close in their relationship that they did everything together. They both had girlfriends and were happy in their relationships. Whenever they went out, it was always as a foursome or more if other friends wanted to be included. Life seemed to be going along happily and well. What on earth went wrong? This just couldn't be true. This was more than a nightmare for his mother. It was hell. It was every parent's hell. The spirit in my home watched the ambulance and police arrive. He watched his father's car screeching into the driveway and flinging the door wide open as he tore himself from the car and ran to the garage. He watched his brother drive and park next to his father's car and rushed to the garage. He watched his friends arrive to sort out what really happened and whether or not it was just some sick joke. They were not really in any condition to support the parents and their friend, the spirit's brother. The spirit was in so much shock himself, he really didn't quite know what to do with himself. But he chose to come and sit in my lounge and watch all this unfold. Why was beyond me. I knew deep down his guides brought him to me to try to help him through this shock, and if not, come to terms with what he had done. At least try to understand the impact his actions had on those he loved. The young man in my lounge, I call him a young man because that's how he presented, looked as real as you and I. Except, of course, I knew he was now in spirit form. He needed support. His family needed support. His friends walking up and down the middle of the road, they needed support. I wanted so much to cross the road and say to his parents, "It's okay. He's in my lounge." But of course, I could not do that. But I desperately wanted to reach out and help these people and bring them comfort. I had not actually met these neighbors. They were relatively new to the neighborhood. So that made it even more difficult for me to go and support them. However, I finally did go. As I arrived on their doorstep and introduced myself, I was welcomed by their friends and invited in. The funeral director arrived, and everyone directed him to me to take him through to the parents and introduce him. I did feel a little awkward doing this, as I hadn't even met the family myself. Of course, I introduced myself to the family and offered whatever support they would allow me to give. But I was not made to feel welcome at that time, so I withdrew. Before I could leave, the mother of some of the young people wandered around the street, asked me, "Please give them some support. They need it." Again, I felt awkward as the family had not made me feel welcome. So I let them know where I lived and gave them an open invitation to come back to talk to me at any time. It seemed the best I could do given the circumstances. I knew it would not be helpful if the family viewed me as interfering. Meanwhile, at home, I still had a young man, totally distraught. He was watching out my window at the growing gathering and the tears that were openly flowing from these young people who could not understand why such a tragedy had to happen. These teenagers were even sitting in the middle of the street trying to console one another. I remembered the dinner I was supposed to be serving up to my family. I tried to make it tasty and attractive, but it was a heavy heart that I sat and tried to create a happy atmosphere at the dinner table. My heart and mind was with the parents, the brother, the friends, the young man in my lounge. It was very hard to find an appetite under those circumstances. I sat with the young man for many hours that night. Sometimes I talked to him. Sometimes I just sat and kept him company. I watched him go through a myriad of emotions, but foremost in my mind was his total grief and pain he had inflicted on everyone. It was as though he was totally immobilized by that grief. And if he could have, he would have turned the clock back and not made that choice. It was a little late for that remorse. All I could do was try to support him as much as I could. It was such a sad time. It was crushing to witness this young man's grief as he watched the hearse come and remove his body from his home. This was reality, and this devastated young man was not able to tear his eyes away from watching his home. He watched the hearse return the next day and carry his coffin into the house. One of my upstairs windows gave a view into a part of his parents' house, and it just so happened we could see into the room where the young man's coffin was placed. I do not have the words to describe the desolation I felt for this young man looking across the road at his coffin and not having the courage to go over there and be with his family. I can only suppose that his presence with me gave him some support and understanding so that he felt it was safe to stay with me. The next day, the funeral arrived, and together we watched the coffin being carried out of his home for the last time. I talked to him as lovingly as I could. I tried to help him not to have so much fear, whilst assuring him that he would be safe to go into the light. I believe he did not have the courage to go to his funeral, He simply was not coping well. I knew he would receive lots of support on the other side. I think that once the hearse had taken his physical body away to the funeral, he felt he had nothing to lose by going into the light. As he took his leave of me, he thanked me for being there for him and helping him to realize what it was that he had done and that it could not be undone, no matter how much regret he had. It was with gratitude that I could see the grace being given to him from angels on the other side. He was cradled with love, for want of a better description, and I knew he had a long way to go to come to terms with the choices he had made. But I took comfort knowing he had lots of love and support on his journey. I was surprised that in the days following the funeral, his mother sought me out to talk and for support, which I gladly gave to her. But how could I ever tell her her son had spent his last days on the earth in my home? Oh no, that was never going to happen. It was sad to watch the disintegration of their family over the next several months as they each tried to come to terms with losing their loved one to suicide. They didn't seem to be able to go through their grief together. They sought refuge and distance from one another until finally they decided to sell their home and move away from such tragic memories and try to bring their family back together. It was terribly sad to watch, to be a witness to all of this happening. At the same time, I felt privileged to know firsthand the destruction of suicide on both sides of the veil, the far-reaching consequences that cannot be taken back, the questions that will forever be asked by the family of why, and the inability of their son on the other side to offer answers and let his family know that he had taken responsibility for his actions. It tore me apart, not being able to give the family the peace they so badly needed to enable them to go forward and find joy in their lives again. But this was now their journey to find their way out of their darkness and to be able to love one another without blaming each other or themselves. What happens when someone commits suicide? What happens to them on the other side? Where do they go to? Are they sent straight back here again? Are they sent to hell? I'm often asked these questions. I know there are lots of ideas out there as to what happens to these spirits. I can speak from experience, having watched angels embrace the young man in this story. The angels took this young man with them into the light, Suicide spirits are very loved and supported on their journey. My mind receives wisdom, visions that these spirits are given as much time as they need to rest and are counseled regularly as they come to terms and accept responsibility for what they have done and what other options were available to them. The purpose of working through these other options that they could have chosen to do rather than end their lives prematurely is to help them grow spiritually and move forward in their learning. This process will take as long as it takes. There are no pressures on these spirits to achieve certain levels within determined time frames. It just takes as long as it takes. My experiences have taught me that if one day these spirits who have taken their own lives have the opportunity to talk to their families through a medium, and if the family can cope with this communication, it is a great relief for spirits to be able to pass on their love to their family and let them know that it was not their fault, that all responsibility lay with the one who ended their life. The souls in the spirit world want to apologize for the pain they are responsible for and totally accept responsibility for their lack of good judgment. They have learned that they were unable to make good decisions anymore. Thus, they ended their life prematurely. There is no blame whatsoever toward the family. This is such a blessing for the family to be given this knowledge. And while the pain will never leave them, it helps the family to move forward with some hope that their loved one on the other side is safe. That is one of the most important emotions the family needs comfort with, knowing their darlings are safe. It is incredible to watch the changes take place with the family when they have been able to have contact with their loved one. It is like the light has been allowed to enter their dark lives and there is hope. And hope is everything when you are left feeling there is nothing. We make our own choices. For those that have sadly had to endure through such experiences, may you know angels embrace your loved ones and embrace you also. And angels shed raindrops from heaven. I leave this with you with all the blessings and with love from your angels, from God, from Jesus, and from your loved ones. I'll see you again. Bye.